You do not get angry because people are powerful. You get angry because they know exactly where you are still weak. A rude comment, a dismissive tone, a delayed reply, a look, a word, a small act of disrespect, and suddenly your whole inner world starts moving. Your body tightens, your mind speeds up. You begin replaying what happened, building arguments, imagining responses, carrying the moment far longer than it deserves. And that is the part most people never question. Not what the other person did, but why something so small can take up so much space inside them. Because anger is rarely just about the moment. It is about control, ego, expectation, pride, old wounds, the need to be respected, the need to be understood, the need to win. And when those things are still unguarded, other people do not need much to disturb your peace. They just need access. So this episode is not about becoming emotionless. It is not about pretending nothing affects you. It is about something much more valuable than that. It is about learning how to stop giving other people that much power over your nervous system, your thoughts, your mood, and your behavior. It is about becoming the kind of person who can face disrespect, stupidity, provocation, and difficult personalities without immediately losing balance. Because real strength is not found in loud reactions. It is found in self-command, in the ability to pause, to see clearly, to refuse to let another person drag you down to the level of your first impulse. And once you understand how that works, anger starts to look less like power and more like a leak of energy, a leak of clarity, a leak of dignity. Tonight I want to walk with you through 10 lessons that can change that. 10 shifts that make you harder to provoke, harder to shake, and much less available to the chaos of other people. Not by making you cold, but by making you stronger. Not by teaching suppression, but by teaching control. Because the person who angers you controls you, and that should bother you more than anything they said. The first lesson is this: your reaction is your responsibility. That sounds simple until life puts pressure on it. Someone disrespects you, someone interrupts you, lies to you, speaks down to you, ignores your effort, or acts in a way that feels selfish and unfair. In that moment, most people instantly move into blame. They made me angry. They ruined my mood. They pushed me too far. And that way of thinking feels natural because it protects the ego. It keeps responsibility outside of you, but it also keeps power outside of you. Because if another person controls your reaction, then your inner state will always belong to whoever knows how to provoke you. That is the trap most people live in without realizing it. They think anger proves strength, when very often it proves exposure. It shows exactly where they are still easy to control. A rude tone changes their whole mood. A stupid comment stays in their head for hours. One moment of disrespect follows them into the rest of the day. They carry it into the next conversation, the next decision, the next night. And all because they never learned the difference between being affected by something and surrendering to it. This is where emotional maturity begins. Not when life becomes fair, and not when people finally behave well enough to make your peace easy. It begins when you stop making other people responsible for what happens inside you. That does not mean their behavior becomes acceptable. It means their behavior no longer gets automatic access to your nervous system. You stop treating every irritation like an invasion that must be answered immediately. You start seeing it as a moment that reveals something about them, but also something about you. It reveals whether you are still ruled from the outside. And that question matters more than most people want to admit, because the angry reaction usually feels justified. That is why it is so seductive. It feels righteous. It feels earned. But being justified is not the same as being in control. You can have every reason to be upset and still handle the moment badly. You can be completely right about the other person and still lose your peace, your clarity, and your dignity in the way you respond. That is why responsibility matters so much here. It forces you to stop asking only, "What did they do?" and start asking, "What am I about to do with what they did?" That shift changes everything. Now the moment is no longer just about their behavior. It becomes a test of your self-command, a chance to see whether your reactions belong to your values or to your impulses. And once you start seeing anger that way, you become much harder to shake. Because you realize something most people never fully learn. The person who triggers you is not automatically the person who controls you. Control begins the moment you decide your response will come from your standards, not from their behavior. And if that is true, then the next lesson becomes unavoidable. A huge amount of anger does not come from what people do. It comes from the fact that you expected them to be different. The second lesson is this: stop expecting people to think like you. A huge part of anger is not caused by other people's behavior alone. It is caused by the gap between how they acted and how you believed they should have acted. You expected maturity, but got ego. You expected honesty, but got avoidance. You expected respect, but got carelessness. You expected them to use your standards, your emotional logic, your level of awareness. And when they did not, frustration rose fast, because part of you was not just reacting to reality, it was arguing with it. That argument is exhausting. A lot of people live with constant irritation because they keep demanding that everyone around them operate from the same code they do. They want people to be more thoughtful, more self-aware, more disciplined, more fair. And in theory, that sounds reasonable. But emotionally, it becomes a trap. Because now your peace depends on other people becoming wiser than they currently are. And that is a terrible investment. People move from their nature, from their habits, from their wounds, from their insecurities, from their level of development. Some people are considerate, some are impulsive, some are honest, some protect themselves with excuses, silence, manipulation, or selfishness. Some are calm until their ego feels threatened. Some are polite until they stop getting what they want. This is not cynicism, it is realism, and realism protects peace better than idealism ever will. A lot of anger disappears when you stop being shocked by human limitation. That does not mean you approve of it. It means you stop acting surprised every time immature people act immature. You stop draining yourself asking, why are they like this? As if the universe made a personal mistake. They are like this because this is where they are. That truth may be disappointing, but it is much lighter than outrage. Think about how many small moments get emotionally inflated because of hidden expectation. A coworker takes credit, and you feel not only irritated, but offended that they would do that. A family member repeats the same selfish pattern, and you react not only to the moment, but to the fact that they still have not changed. Someone sends a cold message, and you spiral, not because the message was so devastating, but because it collided with the version of them you still wanted to believe in. In all these moments, anger grows in the space between reality and expectation. The more clearly you see people, the less personally you take what was never really about you. You become better at predicting behavior, better at protecting your energy, and less emotionally ambushed by ordinary human inconsistency. This is one reason calm people often seem stronger. They are not living in fantasy about what people should be. They are dealing with what people actually are. And once you stop wasting energy on that argument with reality, Another skill becomes possible. You stop reacting so quickly. You create space, and that space is where real self-control begins. The third lesson is this: master the pause before the reaction. This is where emotional control stops being theory and becomes visible in real life, because anger moves fast. It wants speed. It wants expression. It wants you to close the distance between feeling and action before wisdom has time to arrive. That is why so much damage happens in seconds. A quick reply, a sharp tone, a message sent too early, a sentence that feels powerful for 10 seconds and embarrassing for the next 3 days. The pause interrupts that chain. It gives your higher mind time to catch up with your first impulse. Before the pause, you are just a triggered nervous system looking for release. After the pause, you become a person with choice again, and that difference matters more than most people realize. A 3-second pause can save a relationship from unnecessary damage. A 10-second pause can stop you from saying something your ego wants to say, but your values will have to carry later. A 1-minute pause can protect your whole day from being hijacked by one small moment. Most people never pause because the urge feels too convincing. The body tightens, the mind builds the argument, the emotion says, respond now, correct them now, defend yourself now, prove your point now. And when the feeling is strong, immediate action starts looking like strength. But it usually is not strength. It is overflow. It is pressure looking for somewhere to go. That is why the pause is powerful. It gives you a moment to separate the event from the meaning you are rushing to attach to it. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Someone sends a cold text. Someone makes a rude comment in a meeting. The first interpretation rises instantly: disrespect, rejection, attack. But the pause gives you time to ask a better question. What actually happened, and what is my emotional mind trying to add to it right now? That question alone can prevent a lot of stupidity, and the pause does not need to be dramatic. It can be one slow breath before answering. It can be deciding not to reply while your chest is still tight. It can be excusing yourself from the room. It can be putting the phone down and walking for a minute before responding. It can be saying, "Let me think about that," instead of saying the first thing your pride wants to say. These are small acts on the outside, but internally they are major acts of self-respect. Because every pause says the same thing: my first impulse does not automatically get control of my behavior. That is where dignity begins. The people who keep their peace under pressure are usually not the ones who feel nothing. They are the ones who learned how to delay action long enough for clarity to enter. They understand that the first emotional wave is rarely the wisest one. It is often the most dramatic one, the most defensive, the most ego-driven. And if you obey it too quickly, you give a temporary emotion permanent consequences. So the next time something provokes you, remember this: the pause is not weakness. It is your last line of defense before regret. And if you can build that habit, you will start discovering something even more important. Just because you feel something intensely does not mean it deserves to become action. The fourth lesson is this: not every emotion deserves an action. This is where a lot of people stay emotionally young without realizing it. They feel something and immediately assume they must do something. They feel hurt, so they explain. They feel angry, so they attack. They feel irritated, so they become cold. They feel disrespected, so they rush to defend themselves. In their mind, the emotion itself becomes the justification. But emotions are real without being wise. They can tell you that something matters, but they cannot always tell you what to do about it. That distinction changes everything. Because once you start treating every emotion like a command, your life becomes chaotic very quickly. You stop choosing your responses based on values, timing, or consequence. You choose based on intensity. Whatever feeling is strongest in the moment becomes your leader. And that is exactly how people ruin conversations, damage trust, create unnecessary conflict, and turn small moments into lasting problems. Not because they were evil, not because they were weak, because they were obedient to a temporary state. Anger is especially dangerous here because it creates a false sense of clarity. It makes you feel certain that you are right, certain that the other person deserves your reaction, certain that silence would be weakness and restraint would be dishonesty. But many emotional states create that illusion. Hurt can make you want reassurance from the wrong person. Pride can make you want to prove something that does not need proving. Shame can make you over-explain. Fear can make you retreat too early. The emotion feels meaningful, so the action feels necessary. But that is often the exact moment where maturity is tested. Real self-control begins when you stop asking, "What do I feel like doing?" and start asking, "What would this emotion make me do if I were careless?" That is a very different question. It creates distance. It helps you see the emotional impulse before it becomes behavior. And once you can see it clearly, you can stop confusing emotional honesty with emotional obedience. This matters in ordinary life more than people think. A tense text arrives, and you feel the urge to respond immediately. A family member says something subtle and rude, and you feel the urge to expose the whole pattern right there. A partner disappoints you, and you feel the urge to punish with silence. A coworker annoys you, and you feel the urge to sharpen your tone just enough to make them feel it. In all these moments, the feeling is real. But real does not mean useful. Acting on it immediately often gives the emotion more influence than it deserves. The strongest people are not those who do not feel deeply. They are the ones who can feel deeply without becoming automatic. They can sit with the heat without turning it into damage. They can let an emotion pass through them without handing it the wheel. That is not suppression. That is discipline. It is one of the clearest signs that a person has grown beyond impulse. And once you stop treating every emotion like it needs to become action, you start seeing another truth more clearly. A lot of conflict is not really about the issue anymore. It is about the ego needing to win. The fifth lesson is this: let go of the need to be right. A lot of anger survives because the moment stopped being about truth a long time ago. Now it is about ego, about position, about not wanting to look weak, foolish, dismissed, or misunderstood. The argument may begin with a real issue, but once the ego gets involved, the emotional goal changes. You no longer want clarity. You want victory. You want the last word. You want the other person to feel your intelligence, your hurt, your superiority, or your moral advantage. And the moment that happens, peace leaves the room. This is why so many conflicts drag on long after they stopped being useful. Not because the topic matters that much, but because neither person wants to release their grip on being the one who is right. It becomes a quiet contest of control. Who gets to define what happened? Who gets to feel justified? Who gets to leave the moment emotionally taller? And the problem with ego-driven conflict is that even when you win, you usually lose something better in the process. Calm, dignity, perspective, sometimes even the relationship itself. Most people underestimate how expensive the need to be right can become. It makes you keep explaining when silence would be stronger. It makes you keep arguing when the other person is no longer listening. It makes you prove points that do not improve your life in any way. It makes you carry whole conversations in your head for hours because some part of you still wants a better ending, a sharper comeback, a cleaner victory. But peace does not come from winning every argument. Often it comes from understanding that some arguments are beneath your nervous system. This is especially obvious in everyday situations. A partner gets defensive. A family member twists the story. Someone online responds in bad faith. A co-worker refuses to own what they did. In all of these moments, the ego wants to fight for the perfect version of reality. It wants correction. It wants acknowledgement. It wants the moment to close in a way that restores your internal image. But sometimes that closure never comes. Sometimes the other person is too immature, too self-protective, too threatened, or too limited to meet you where truth actually lives. If you keep chasing peace through their recognition, you will stay trapped in emotional debt. Letting go of the need to be right does not mean becoming weak, passive, or confused. It means becoming less available to pointless battles. It means being secure enough to say, "I know what is true, and I do not need to bleed for it here." That is not surrender. That is proportion. It is knowing that not every misunderstanding is worth correcting. Not every accusation deserves a defense, and not every conflict deserves your best energy. The strongest people are often the ones who can walk away without needing the whole room to agree with them. They do not need everyone to validate their version before they can return to peace. They know that ego starvation feels uncomfortable at first, but it is much cheaper than emotional war. And once you stop needing to win every argument, another weakness starts becoming much easier to see. The need to be seen correctly by everyone. The need to build your worth from other people's opinions. The sixth lesson is this: detach your worth from other people's opinions. This is one of the deepest reasons people get angry so quickly. What looks like irritation on the surface is often a threat underneath, not just to comfort, but to identity. Someone criticizes you, dismisses you, talks down to you, ignores you, misunderstands you, and the reaction becomes bigger than the moment because part of you feels reduced by it. Now you are not only dealing with what happened, you are dealing with what it seems to say about your value. That is a dangerous way to live, because if your self-worth depends on how people see you, then your emotional life will always be unstable. One compliment lifts you, one rude comment poisons you, one moment of praise makes you feel secure, one moment of rejection makes you spiral. At that point, you are no longer just sensitive. You are dependent. Your peace is tied to people who may be careless, immature, jealous, reactive, or simply having a bad day. That means your internal state is always vulnerable to forces that were never qualified to define you in the first place. This is why some people seem calm under criticism, while others fall apart. It is not always because one person feels less. Often it is because one person has built more of their value from the inside. They can hear feedback without collapsing into it. They can be judged without immediately treating judgment like a verdict. They can be disliked without turning that into a full identity crisis. Their sense of self has weight, and weight is hard to shake. A lot of anger is really wounded self-worth trying to defend itself in real time. That is why some reactions feel so disproportionate. The event was small, but the wound it touched was not. A dismissive tone at work does not just feel annoying, it feels like proof that you are not respected. A cold message does not just feel distant, it feels like proof that you are not important. Someone disagreeing with you does not just feel uncomfortable, it feels like a threat to how you see yourself. And once worth gets entangled with every moment like that, emotional life becomes exhausting. Detaching your worth from other people's opinions does not mean becoming arrogant or pretending feedback never matters. It means their opinion no longer gets to decide your inner value in real time. You can listen without surrendering. You can consider without collapsing. You can hear what is useful, reject what is distorted, and remain intact. That is emotional strength in a very practical form. It makes you harder to manipulate, harder to bait, and much harder to control through approval or disapproval. Think about how much emotional energy people waste trying to manage how they appear in every interaction. They want to seem smart, respected, attractive, competent, unbothered, morally right. And the moment something threatens that image, anger appears as defense. But when your worth is rooted more deeply than your image, you stop fighting so hard for surface control. You become less reactive because you are less fragile. And once your worth is no longer sitting in other people's hands, you gain access to one of the strongest tools in the whole episode: silence. Not weak silence, chosen silence, controlled silence, the kind that protects your energy instead of leaking it. The seventh lesson is this: use silence as a form of strength. Most people talk too much when they are angry because they think expression will give them power back. Usually, it does the opposite. The more triggered you are, the more your words start serving the emotion instead of serving you. You explain too much, reveal too much, defend too much, threaten too much. You keep talking because part of you thinks the next sentence will finally restore control. But in many cases, every extra sentence is just proof that you already lost it. Silence is powerful when it is chosen, not when it is forced by fear. That difference matters. Weak silence is withdrawal because you are intimidated, confused, or shut down. Strong silence is restraint because you see the moment clearly and decide it does not deserve your energy. One comes from helplessness. The other comes from self-command. And people can feel the difference, even when no one says a word. A lot of conflict gets uglier because someone cannot tolerate leaving space in the moment. They need to answer, need to correct, need to explain what they meant, need to show they are not the kind of person who can be spoken to that way. But this is often ego disguised as honesty. It feels strong because it is immediate. But real strength is often quieter than that. It knows that not every provocation deserves access to your voice. Not every misunderstanding deserves your best language. Not every attack deserves a performance. Think about how many situations collapse under the weight of too many words. A relationship fight that could have cooled down becomes personal because both people keep adding more. A family tension gets worse because nobody knows when to stop. A rude comment at work expands into drama because someone had to respond in the moment instead of waiting until they were clear. Silence would not have solved everything in those moments, but it would have prevented unnecessary damage. This is why silence can protect your dignity better than impulsive speech. It gives the emotion time to lose momentum. It prevents you from saying things that feel justified now and embarrassing later. It also protects your energy from being wasted on people who do not deserve that level of access. Some people provoke because they want a reaction. They want proof that they can enter your mind and shake your balance. The fastest way to disappoint them is not always with a better argument. Sometimes it is with the absence of one. But silence does not mean passivity. It does not mean you never speak up, never set the record straight, never confront what needs confronting. It means you choose the timing and tone from strength instead of heat. You speak when you are ready, not when the moment is dragging you. That kind of silence is not empty. It is active. It is control holding the line until clarity is present. The strongest person in the room is often not the one with the sharpest response. It is the one who can remain unhooked long enough to decide whether a response is even necessary. And once you develop that kind of silence, something else becomes easier too. You stop taking everyone's behavior so personally because you begin seeing that a lot of what hurts people is not really about you. It is about the wound inside them. The 8th lesson is this: understand the wound behind people's behavior. This does not mean becoming naive. It does not mean excusing disrespect, tolerating cruelty, or turning every harmful person into a victim in your mind. It means learning to see more clearly, because a lot of behavior that triggers people so deeply is not coming from strength. It is coming from insecurity, fear, shame, envy, emotional immaturity, or inner disorder that has never been faced honestly. And when you do not see that, you personalize everything. You assume the rude comment must mean something about your value. You assume the controlling behavior must mean the other person is powerful. You assume the passive-aggressive tone must be a serious judgment of who you are. But often, what you are really witnessing is a person leaking their inner state onto the people around them. Their disrespect is their instability speaking. Their arrogance is compensation. Their manipulation is fear, trying to stay in control. Their cruelty is often weakness in armor. This changes the emotional temperature of a moment very quickly, because when you stop seeing every bad behavior as a verdict about you, it loses some of its power to enter you. You no longer react from wounded personalization. You start responding from clearer interpretation. Instead of asking, "How dare they?" you begin asking, "What is going on inside a person that this is how they move through the world?" That question creates distance, not cold distance, useful distance, the kind that helps you stay steady. Think about how often people act badly when they feel small. The coworker who constantly interrupts may be desperate to feel important. The family member who criticizes everything may be carrying old resentment or insecurity they never learned how to process. The person who tries to embarrass others may be terrified of being exposed themselves. The one who becomes controlling in conflict is often the one who feels the least safe internally. None of this makes the behavior acceptable, but it makes it easier to stop worshipping it, because that is what many people do without realizing it. They treat bad behavior like power. They let someone's anger, rudeness, manipulation, or coldness dominate the whole emotional field. But many difficult people are not powerful. They are simply undisciplined. They are not deeply grounded. They are just loud, defensive, impulsive, or emotionally unhealed. Once you start seeing that, you stop giving their behavior more authority than it deserves. This is one of the cleanest ways to reduce anger, not by pretending the moment did not happen, but by understanding it more accurately. The more accurately you see people, the less likely you are to exaggerate their emotional impact on you. You realize that some of what hurt you was never really about your worth. It was about their wound, their pattern, their limitation, their unresolved chaos. And once you see that clearly, another truth becomes unavoidable. Staying calm does not mean staying open to everything. Understanding people is not the same as giving them unlimited access. Peace without boundaries does not last. The 9th lesson is this: protect your peace with boundaries. A lot of people want emotional peace without changing access. They want to stay calm, but they keep letting the same disrespect in. They want stability, but they keep staying available to the same exhausting dynamics. They want to be less reactive, but they keep standing in places that repeatedly drain, provoke, and disturb them. Then they wonder why peace feels so fragile. But peace was never meant to survive constant violation without protection. This is where boundaries stop being optional. Because calm is not the same as tolerance. Being unbothered does not mean accepting everything. It does not mean staying soft toward behavior that keeps harming you. It does not mean becoming endlessly patient with people who have shown you repeatedly that they do not respect your time, your energy, your limits, or your dignity. That is not emotional maturity. That is often fear wearing polite clothes. A boundary is not an emotional speech. It is a structural decision. It is deciding what you will no longer explain 10 times, what tone you will no longer entertain, what access someone loses when they keep crossing the line. It is ending the conversation sooner, replying less, clarifying once instead of debating forever, leaving the room, saying no without decorating it. It is refusing to keep proving your value to people who benefit from you having none. This matters because many people confuse suppression with peace. They stay silent, stay nice, stay flexible, stay accommodating, and then call themselves calm while resentment grows underneath. But resentment is often the price of a boundary that should have been set earlier. If you constantly have to manage your anger around the same person, it may not be a self-control problem anymore. It may be an access problem. Think about how many emotional loops disappear the moment a clean boundary enters the situation. The person who only texts when they need something loses immediate access. The family member who keeps disrespecting you stops getting the same level of intimacy. The co-worker who speaks to you carelessly gets less informal openness. The argument that always happens late at night no longer gets entertained after a certain hour. Suddenly, your peace is no longer dependent on surviving the same pattern over and over. It is protected before the damage spreads. That is why boundaries are not cold. They are merciful to your nervous system. They reduce the number of moments where self-control has to work overtime just to survive avoidable nonsense. They stop turning every week into a repeated emotional exam. And the strongest people understand this well. They do not just try to be calm in chaos, they remove unnecessary chaos where they can. So yes, stay composed, stay mature, stay measured, but do not confuse openness with virtue when what you really need is distance, consequence, and clarity. Because once boundaries are in place, the final lesson becomes possible in a much deeper way. You can stop carrying what already happened. You can stop feeding what already hurt you. You can let go, reframe, and move forward. The 10th lesson is this: let go, reframe, and move forward. This is where everything either becomes freedom or becomes residue. Because even if you understand responsibility, expectation, pause, ego, worth, silence, wounded behavior, and boundaries, none of it fully changes your life if you keep carrying old anger long after the moment has ended. That is how people stay emotionally trapped. The event is over, but they keep reliving it, replaying it, rewriting it, rehearsing what they should have said, what the other person meant, how unfair it was, how insulting it felt. And little by little, the anger is no longer tied to the moment. It becomes part of the person's identity, part of how they remember, interpret, and move through life. That is a terrible burden to keep carrying, because the longer you hold on to anger, the more it starts shaping things that had nothing to do with the original event. It changes your tone, your openness, your trust, your ability to stay light. It makes you more suspicious, more guarded, more easily irritated, more likely to react before you understand. You think you are holding on to the anger because it proves something, protects something, or keeps the memory alive in the right way. But most of the time, it is just draining life from you in the background. Letting go does not mean pretending nothing happened. It does not mean excusing bad behavior. It does not mean becoming passive, forgetful, or available again to the same kind of harm. It means refusing to keep the moment alive through repetition. It means saying, "This already took enough from me." It does not get tomorrow too. That is what real release looks like. Not denial, refusal. And one of the fastest ways to help that process is reframing. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" start asking, "What does this reveal? What did it expose in them? What did it expose in me? What expectation was broken? What pattern became visible? What boundary should now be clearer? What part of me was still too easy to disturb?" The moment may still hurt, but once it becomes information, it gets lighter. Information can guide you. Resentment can only keep you stuck. This is one reason emotionally strong people recover faster. Not because they never get angry, and not because they feel less. They recover faster because they stop turning every injury into a permanent inner monument. They learn. They adjust. They protect themselves better. Then they keep moving. They do not keep kneeling in front of what hurt them just because it was painful. They refuse to make an identity out of being wronged. And that is the real goal of this whole episode. Not to become cold, not to become unreachable, not to become some artificial version of calm that never feels anything. The goal is to become harder to control, harder to provoke, harder to pull out of position. The kind of person who does not hand over their inner state to anyone rude, immature, manipulative, chaotic, or unhealed enough to demand it. So for the next 24 hours, try something simple. The next time someone irritates you, do not ask, "How do I prove my point? How do I make them understand? Or how do I get the last word?" Ask one better question. What is the most self-respecting response available to me right now? Then choose that. Not the loudest response, not the fastest, the cleanest one. Because the person who controls the reaction controls the outcome. And that person should be you. What changes a life is rarely one dramatic moment of mastery. It is usually a quieter shift than that. A person starts noticing how often they were giving themselves away, how often a small comment stole too much energy, how often anger made them feel powerful for a moment but left them smaller afterward, how often they confused reaction with strength, emotional intensity with truth, and constant irritation with honesty. And little by little, they begin to see something they could not fully see before. The real problem was never just difficult people. It was how easily other people were allowed to enter the mind, disturb the nervous system, and shape the day. That is what this episode was really about. Not becoming emotionless, not pretending disrespect does not exist, not learning how to smile while swallowing everything. It was about becoming less available to chaos, less easy to provoke, less willing to let another person's immaturity become your emotional atmosphere. Because once you understand that your reaction is your responsibility, that your expectations create half your frustration, that the pause protects your dignity, that not every feeling deserves expression, that ego keeps many conflicts alive, that your worth cannot stay tied to other people's opinions, that silence can be strength, that wounded people often act from their own inner disorder, that boundaries protect peace, and that letting go is the final proof of control. Something inside you starts to harden in the right way, not into bitterness, into self-command. And that is the deeper truth. The goal was never just to stop getting angry. The goal was to stop being so easy to move, to stop letting every careless person, every rude tone, every disappointing moment, every selfish act, and every small provocation pull you out of yourself. Because a life built that way is always unstable, always reacting, always leaking energy into places that do not deserve it. But a person who learns these lessons becomes different. Still human, still feeling, still aware, but steadier, cleaner, harder to bait, harder to shake, more capable of choosing peace without becoming passive, and more capable of setting limits without becoming cold. That is real emotional strength. Not performance, not image, not the fantasy of permanent calm, the ability to remain yours, even when life gives you every reason not to. So take this into the next 24 hours and test it in one real moment, not in theory, in real life. The next time someone says something careless, delays a reply, acts selfish, disrespects a boundary, or gives you a reason to react, do not rush. Watch yourself. Catch the first impulse. Feel the heat without obeying it. Then choose the response that protects your peace, not your ego. That is where the episode becomes real, because the person who controls the reaction controls the direction. And if your peace is going to belong to anyone, it should belong to you.